great to be in front of you. I want to spend a bit of time talking to you about the power of destination thinking and also knowing who you are. Some people say start with why. Some people say it's really important to have the purpose, the why in mind. I think that's true. But I also think there's something ever so powerful about thinking about identity, who we are, what we stand for, what principles we really want to live by. And why does that matter? Because I think really decisions are made in the moment by our identity and sense of self. Let me explain. Captain Tom was a rather great hero in the COVID time, but what got Captain Tom to do what he did? Was it that he woke up one morning and said to himself, I've never been knighted. I've decided I'd like to go to Buckingham Palace and meet the Queen. I've got this picture in mind. I don't suppose so. I really guess what happened was he woke up one morning and thought, crikey, this is more serious than I thought. Look at the news, people are dying. So probably my time to step up. And so do what Arthur Ashe, the first black tennis player who broke onto the scene, won Wimbledon, what he advised. He said, really, control the controllables, but in a different way. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And I reckon that was Captain Tom. Right, I'm going to start where I am in my garden, use what I have. I've got a Zimmer frame, do what I can. I'll try 100 laps. And if somebody had said, excuse me, Captain Tom, what are you doing there in your garden? I think he would have probably said, I'm just doing what soldiers do. I'm improvising. But you're not a soldier. You've not served for 50 years. Oh, once a soldier, always a soldier. And that's me. I'm soldiering on. Step aside, coming through. And there's a sense in which the decision's made based on who we think we are. What would a soldier do in this time? Why don't you throw a sickie? You're knackered. I can't throw a sickie because I'm a nurse and this is COVID. We don't do that. Fancy a piece of bacon? No thanks, it's my faith. Wouldn't take it. But the decision's made by identity. Why'd you travel halfway across the globe to see your football team lose again? Well, that's what Spurs fans do. No, it's identity that makes the decision. And so I think there's a couple of things really powerful about having a business and growing it. And the first thing is, yes, have a plan, have an aim, a massive destination in mind, but also be really secure about who you are, what you stand for, who you want to be, and who you want to travel that journey with. So, and I think there's a wonderful tension between those two things, you see. We've got this place to go, and we need to be like this. And I think you get some real energy from that. But the picture does matter. So you could keep notes here or do a predictive exercise. How much management bullshit bingo? What's he going to say in management speak? Or you could do one which is name dropping bingo. How many names could Marcus drop into this conversation? Because a few years ago, I worked with Paula Radcliffe's father. And I said to him, when did you first realise your daughter was going to be astonishing? When did you first get that notion you've got an amazing child in your house? And he said, Marcus, don't be all dramatic with me. You know, she was never an athlete at school. She was just an average kid, average academic, average athletic. But when she came home from school when she was 12, she'd done cross-country running. And she said to my wife and I, we did cross-country today and I came second and I wasn't really trying. You know, you keep saying, what am I going to be when I grow up? I now know I'm going to be a long-distance runner. And Peter said, my wife and I looked at each other and said, yes, dear, and thought no more about it. But I'll never forget that moment because he put his cup of tea down and he raised his hands. And he said, my little girl saw this. She made a picture that day, and the picture she made is the one she's been running towards ever since. He said, I think all children have pictures. They have wild hallucinations, fantasies about what they can do, probably put in there by Walt Disney. But they have these fantasies. But of course, over time, those fantasies dissolve. They get a teacher who says something like, I taught your mother, she was thick as well. Or they get a boss who says, that's about as far as you can go. Or they listen to the media and hear what economists are saying, and you can only grow this much in this economy. And before we know it, we've shrunk, and the picture's been settled, and we've accepted to compromise. And I came online today to say, really, none of my business to ask you publicly to say what your picture is, but I really think it's a worthy question. And what's your picture for 20 years' time? For 5 years' time? And how much does it matter to you? And by the way, the real question is it big enough? Because the brain's a supercomputer. It answers the size of the questions we ask it. If you ask small questions, you get small answers. Massive ones, and the whole thing goes to town. For example, how do you fix global warming? No, it's finished. The horse has bolted. The polar ice caps are melting. It's done. However, it's an impossible question. But look how the brain then seizes the answer, or tries to. All those collaborations, people making all sorts of collaborations, inventive ideas, innovations, fusion thinking, just amazing stuff happening as a consequence of a massive question. The bigger the question we ask of ourselves, the bigger the response. And I think when one person gets a picture, that's exciting. When two people get a picture, they fall in love. Let's put our dreams together. You get more than the power of 1 + 1. And I think that's the real great duty of leading a business and having people around you. How can we agree on who we want to be and get a collective notion of where this is going to take us? But in the end, that's the way of it. I'm saying the pictures we make are the ones that end up being the ones that our brains completely won't let go until we make it so. So there's Paula Radcliffe. But did you ever listen to Desert Island Discs? Anyone ever listened to Desert Island Discs? Some of you are thinking he really is a loser. But that Radio 4 show where you hear them talking when famous people come on the show and they're asked the question, if we'd sent you to a desert island, which piece of music would you take on your playlist and why? Tell your autobiography through music. And they tell their life story. And they can't all be making it up. And I don't think I'm wrong about the picture. Because, for example, Ellen MacArthur, when they ask her, she says, I was 6 years of age, and I said to my mum, I'm going to sail around the world. And her mum says, you can't do that. You're landlocked. You've never seen the sea. How do you know you'd like it? I just think I would. But how could you afford a boat? I'm going to save up my pocket money. And it's bonkers in some people's book. But there's Denise Lewis. She was 6, and on her show, she said, I saw Daley Thompson and Sebastian Coe win gold medals at the Olympics. I was watching TV with my mum, and I said, I'm going to go to the Olympics. She said, you can't do that. You're a fatty. And fatsos can't run. Well, I might be a fatty now. When I'm older, I will be able to. I'll skip past a couple, but there's Kath Kidston. Kath Kidston was 6 years of age in her garden, and she said, I tore leaves off a bush, gave them to my mum, and said, Mum, imagine these are pound notes. You can buy objects from my shop. Why are we doing this, darling? Because one day I'm going to have shops and I'm practicing. Don't be so silly. We're not that kind of family. We couldn't have shops. Now she's got more than 50. All I'm saying is, I think the picture is a really important driver of unconscious and conscious behaviour. Maybe my favourite, actually. I didn't think I'd like this one. Bear Grylls. He's 8 years of age, and he says to his father comes into his bedroom and tucks him up for the night and puts a poster on the wall, Mount Everest, the biggest, baddest mountain in the world. Could you imagine climbing that, son? He said, my dad was so animated and excited. Every night when I went to sleep for the next 8 years, the last thing I'd see before I slept was Mount Everest. By the time I got to 16, I decided I wanted to join the SAS instead. So the picture came down and I got military things in my bedroom and got into the special reserves. And I jumped out of an aircraft. The parachute didn't open. He fell to the desert, broke his back in 3 places, and was pinned to a slab for a year and a half, unable to move anything from the neck down. He said it was a really dark place, a really serious lockdown. But after 6 months of it, his doctors came to him and showed him a photograph of his spine and said, if you look at this, although it's broken in 3 places, your cord isn't damaged. Your cord's compressed, but the spinal cord's not leaking, which means to say, if you don't move for another year and your bones, if they were to fuse straight and take the pressure off the cord, you might be able to feel your fingers and toes again one day. Wow, is that possible? It is possible. Is it likely? No, but it is possible. Dad, remember the picture when I was a kid, Mount Everest. Could you put that above my bed? And so this wrinkled poster goes above his bed. And his mates of the SAS would come in. They're tigers, by the way. And they'd say, don't torture yourself. That's just too much to ask. But he said none of the nurses laughed because they've all seen this before and they understand the importance of hope. But there he is, the youngest person Britain ever produced to climb to the top of Everest. I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence because we have 11 million receptors in the brain, and 10 million of those are to do with the visual field. What we see, what we keep on seeing, ends up being the stuff we're drawn towards. That's how TV advertising works. That's because people are teleological. The stuff we see is the stuff that we go towards. Therefore, when we really draw a picture for ourselves, have a massive vision, surround ourselves with visually uplifting stuff, it really matters. So you're listening to Marcus Child, Nice But Dim. I've always been thick, but as long as you're nice, that's the main thing. And so, and my father used to say to me, by the way, Marcus, there's no brains in the blood. I was brought up in Tooting, nothing wrong with Tooting, by the way, but I was brought up in a maisonette with working class parents, and my mother and father, my father sold pencils, my mother was a typist all her life, but they were grafters, and they didn't sound like me. And my dad said to me, when I was a kid, we had the 11 plus test. I said, if I passed the 11 plus, would you buy me Sir Clive Sinclair's black watch, this liquid crystal display? My dad said, Marcus, if you pass the 11 plus, I'll buy you a Big Ben, mate. It's not going to happen. So anyway, the point of it, this little drift is, that really matters. How you talk to yourself has a direct impact on your state, and your state directly impacts how you perform, which straight back into self-talk again. It's a really important point too. There is something about how do we maintain an internal monologue, an internal soundtrack that keeps reminding us of the progress we're making. How do you stay uplifted? And by the way, how do you uplift other people around you when things seem doubtful? If you run a marathon, you might get to 22 miles, your legs are going to jelly, and you might say to yourself, I'm absolutely finished. I should have trained harder. I've hit the wall. I'm not going to be able to, I'm going to have to walk now. At that point, you might come out of the Blackwall Tunnel and there's a crowd of people saying, come on, 1075, you can do it. And another person joins in, and before you know it, there's a chant going, 1075. And I don't know what happened to me, but all these people were chanting my number. I just got a new lease of life. I picked up my knees, and 4 miles later, I crashed across the line. I don't know what happened to me. But of course, we influence each other. If we pay compliments, say good stuff when we see good stuff happening, it's amazing how that can change the whole game. That's why people go to football matches and rugby matches anyway to watch. Because I think unconsciously they think, if I really cheer my team on, it can lift them and cause that virtuous circle to begin. But I know what it feels like to step into an exam room, knowing that you're thick and taking the exam with the right leg shaking. And as you face the page, I know this is going to find out how thick I am. And I'm exposed here, which causes a real anxious state. And as a consequence, do you remember O-levels? O-levels where you can get an A to an E, even an F, even an unclassified. And I know you get unclassified because they write it in full on your certificate, just in case you thought U stood for unlucky. And I managed, after a life of that, I suppose, to get unlucky for maths, English, science, total car crash. And I was going to spend the rest of my first job was going to be filling donuts in a factory in Reading. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not very ambitious. But then a teacher got involved and said, I'm going to take you rock climbing if you want to come. Anyone want to come climbing? And it was one thing I could do. I could climb like a monkey. We'd never had a family holiday, but I could climb trees like nothing else, and I'd seen rock faces on television. We went climbing. Mr. Shannon was climbing this wall in the Peak District, went over the overhang, over the lip, fell off and was lowered down, took his harness off, said, Marcus, you have a go. I said, but sir, if you can't do it, if I can't do it, that means I can't do it yet. But that's got nothing to do with what you can do. Put the harness on and don't judge yourself by my standards. You're you. Up you go. You'll enjoy it. I got to the top. I wasn't even tired. He said, you've got a gift, lad. I've never seen balance like this. No adult had ever spoken to me like that. Stay at school and I'll set up a climbing club. I can't stay at school, sir, because I'm thick. No, you just don't believe in yourself. All children who get grade C at O-level, you just got to believe. I said, well, I'm not going to do it. So he came to our house. And how many teachers go to? He came to our house, sat on my sofa with my mum and dad, awkward, and said, we need to persuade him to go back to school. I'm going to set up a climbing club. And my father said, well, you do as your teacher says. So I went back to school again. And the upshot of this story was that, how does this work? I think it's ever so important. I go back to school, I'm supposed to take A-levels and then go and down with the year below and take all my O-levels again in resets. And then on Friday night, Mr. Shannon becomes Tony. and I jump in Tony's Renault 5. Would this be allowed these days, by the way? He was a happily married man, and I should add, and we go climbing. And I come back on Monday morning, tired, having climbed my head off all weekend, and then not done any revision, and then another week of school. But I just know I can't have been working very hard on academic stuff, but I take the resits in November, so it's only 2.5 months. And how can you get a string of unclassifieds that turn into A's and B's just in a couple of months after 16 years of failure? I think something really important happened. Something about confidence and self-belief. If Mr. Shannon can't climb and I can do better than him, and he's clever, surely I might be. I don't know what the equivalence was, but I do know this. I became a coach of the British climbing team. I did climb ever so well, but more importantly, I said to Mr. Shannon, I'd like to be like you. See, you've changed my life. How can I get to be a teacher? He said, go to university. Where did you go, sir? Cambridge, he said. That's where my story ends, by the way. Do you know, actually, to be honest, I got a distinction at Cambridge University, which is just light years away from where Mum and Dad ever said we'd go. And at Cambridge, you'd think I'm mad. We met Professor Anthony Adams, who said, I'm going to teach you about how the brain works. That's the most important thing. How you work, how you're wired. And you learn English literature on your own time. So that's what we learned. We're going to be teachers. And Roger Sperry had got the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1981. And Sperry had found this, just it's ever so curious but powerful. He'd found 25 years of research, but they don't give that Nobel Prize away lightly. And this is an old-fashioned model of the brain, but that's what we had in 81. He said, if you wire up a brain, you see the activity happening in the left hemisphere when we're in wide awake state, when we're being rational, logical, reasonable, argumentative, but when we're theorizing. But in other words, the subjects of mathematics, science, English, they're all loaded up here. I don't care what you think about Romeo and Juliet, but I do think it's important for you to give me a structured, reasonable argument based on good grammar, quotation, and building from good beginning to middle and end. And in your science, analyze how cause makes effect. In maths, use numbers in sequence. Whereas there's flaky subjects like art and drama and PE and pottery, which don't really matter very much. So our minds are shaped by a curriculum which gives primacy to these things. So by the time we leave school, we've worked this brain like a muscle. We go into business and justify, explain, judgment. We've worked this brain ever so strongly. Whereas this flaky, arty thing over here gets less attention. Now I'm being a bit crass, but you can see what I mean, because Professor Adams is saying we're building left hemispherical people when what you really need is a whole brain to be able to answer the questions of the universe. In other words, the people who have changed the world are polymaths. Einstein, a concert level violinist, as well as a mathematician we know him to have been. Leonardo da Vinci paints Mona Lisa, was designing helicopters before their time. Teach the whole brain. Okay, I get it. So where are you when you get your best ideas? If you were to answer that question, I know I'm in a hurry because I've got so much to say, but would you dare call out, where are you when you get great ideas? Oh, let's try this one, let's try that.
Shower.
Righto, stop there. We'll just stop there. Okay, you're in the shower. Other people say things like, when I'm walking the dog, driving the car, going to the gym, swimming, riding a mountain bike, playing music, cooking food. It's those kinds of places. But shower, let's take shower for a second.
Running machine.
Right. Running machine, repetitive task, autopilot, etc. What happens to you then? Well, you go into some kind of glazy-eyed state as you travel. The next slide is the most important one. It doesn't look much, but this is it. This still holds true. They used a cephalogram to measure brainwaves and found that when you're wide awake, you're in the left hemisphere, and in hertz, cycles per second, they explain that the frequency of brainwaves slows down as we go into daydream, light sleep, and deep sleep. Alpha, theta, and delta brainwaves here, beta in the wide awake state. The brain's working all the time. Where are you when you get your best ideas? In the shower. What happens in the shower? Or on the running machine? You go from wide awake into a kind of daydream state, into the right hemisphere. Right hemisphere is where creativity, imagination, fusion of ideas happens. Still with this. So here's the point. The brain's working all the time. We sleep, it doesn't. What's it working on? The answer seems to be the major preoccupations of the left hemisphere. Hence why I like the Bear Grylls story so much. Imagine going to sleep with a picture in mind routinely every single night. Then what goes on in the unconscious as we go to sleep? Well, watch Hannibal Lecter before you go to sleep at night. What happens then? You see horrible images, you hear crunching of bone or whatever, and you feel the jolt or shock of a horror movie. And that's quite a powerful visual, auditory and kinesthetic suggestion. That goes in just here, and that's what the brain works on. Intuition, the material of the unconscious, that comes from the Latin word intuare, literally means teach oneself. So we teach ourselves fear, if that's the most important priority that we go to sleep with. Therefore, let's see how goals work. It's the same thing. You make a picture, Paula Radcliffe, any of those people, I saw it. All the thing is we keep the picture alive. Keep the picture alive, just keep it really visual, powerful. Imagine what it's going to be like when you succeed. So you can imagine what it sounds like, feels like, make it multisensory if you can do that. Then and keep that one alive. That's the stuff that the unconscious is going to work on. How do I make this come true? How do I rebuild a body that's broken to get it up Everest again? And all sorts of lateral fusions will happen, which you can't understand and never will be able to, because the material of the right hemisphere is incomprehensible to the left. Furthermore, you need to think big. Why? Because if you set a reasonable goal, it's a reasonable, logical, rational goal. And therefore, it's achievable. If it's an achievable goal, all you need is half a brain to make it happen. The process of logic and reason and rationality. If you want the whole thing to work, you have to ask something which you can't do, or something which is really challenging. How on earth am I going to do that? Don't know. That's the point. Because when you don't know, that's when you get this thing kicking off, ask a really big question, then this is going to be curious, and it's going to keep on wanting to make that so. By the way, if you don't do this, watch news at 10 and see, I'm not making any small assumption about what's happening in Ukraine or what happened in COVID. But if you go to sleep at night and the last thing you see is COVID numbers, and you keep seeing them night after night, then you can see how that works. If that's the preoccupation and the news of that stuff, then that's going to give us an unsettling time. You can see why so many people had difficulty sleeping in the pandemic. It's pretty cut and dried, really. Go to bed thinking you're a loser because your father says you're thick, and you can see how that works. That's why it's important to keep ourselves really buoyed up and to have big, bold goals. So I left Cambridge, went to a school in Essex. We're all going to change the world after Cambridge. Left wing it was, really. And my mates, most of them went to inner London educational authority schools. I went to a school in Essex, said to my class, my name's Marcus Child, you call me sir. I'm only 22, but I failed all my O-levels. Car crash. But I resat them again, and I realise now that everyone can get them. So you're here with me for a year, so why don't you just go for it? Just get them anyway. Because we might as well use our time well. Are you mental, mate? Most of them wouldn't put their cigarettes out. I went to my first staff meeting with spit all down my back. But Professor Adams said, you have to keep on asking. You have to keep on asking. And I said to them, look, this is how the brain works. We'll have 2 weeks on this. And I wanted them to verify all this stuff through their own experience. And eventually, I think the penny dropped. And so eventually I said, what's your picture? Because one of them said, aren't we supposed to be learning English, sir? I said, thank you for calling me sir. That's a first. But yeah, let's go ahead in that case. Yeah, we will, but tell me what your picture is. And one boy said, do you know, I'm going to be a footballer. I said, good. Who are you going to play for? Ipswich Town, he said. I said, crikey, you've missed the whole point. And this is about having a goal, which you'd be excited about when you've achieved. And he said, well, all right then. I'm going to be captain of my country. I said, that's more like it. That's a goal. So let's get a photograph of a player in your country's outfit and strip, and you photograph your own head, stick that on the player and stick that on your wall, and then go to sleep on that one. Who's next? No, I think I got one from every child in the class. I can't verify that because I never went into their bedrooms to check, just like Mr. Shannon never came into mine. But I think it's just interesting that that's what they and I said, you can tear the picture down tomorrow, but and put up a new one. But whatever happens, have something there that you're really excited by. So that was that. Do you know, I taught, there were supposed to be 7 kids out of 30 would pass grade C in that school. And I taught 142 kids and only 3 didn't get grade C. I'm not trying to boast, but I am saying that I think the method really works. I wonder what picture Harry Kane and Kate Goodall were making when they left in the car and made their journey home. These are great things, but let's cut to this. 2019, I did a talk in Lazard International Investment Bank in Mayfair. The man with the spiky hair on the right came up to me afterwards and said, Marcus, I've been waiting for that conversation for 30 years. I said, how do you mean? He said, I'm Gerard Vim. Do you remember me? I was in your class. And you know, you said, got to have a picture. Well, my dad used to tease me terribly because I was rubbish at maths and he was a cashier in a high street bank. And I decided, I left one of those lessons. I thought, I'm going to be working in one of those big banks in the city so I can tease my dad about how rubbish he was at maths. And now I run a department at Lazard. I reckon I've done a bit better than my dad. My picture came true, Marcus. And next week when you come to speak to us, I'll make sure that Matthew Kelly comes along too. He's the tall guy in the picture. So he was in the same class and we've stayed mates all these years, but he was another would-be loser. But he now runs Bula, the Swiss multinational. He's done rather well for himself, Marcus. And do you remember Dave Nichols? I said, yeah, I do. He was that short guy, not very, quite shy, wasn't he? He didn't say too much. Yeah, well, he's now Nestle's sales director for Europe. I mean, he smashed it. You should see the house he lives in. He really did it, Marcus. But we've all stayed together, like a band of brothers, they call themselves. We meet up from time to time, have reunions, drink together, egg each other on, tease each other. But, you know, we were quite a class, weren't we? Because Matty was also in the same class. He did say he'd be captain of Ireland, and that came true. And when Jamie's in the same class, and he's saying he's going to do it too, suddenly you think this is more than just a coincidence. That when people really stay together, share their goals and dreams, and push hard, think big, if you can do it, I can do it. I think that's the mentality that comes. I worked with a woman once who was at Bank Paribas, and it was just curious because she had mental health problems and her doctor said, you really ought to get outside, do some physical exercise. I said, what's your goal, Chantal? She said, do you know, I think I'm going to learn to row. I live near the Thames, so I'm going to, at Putney, so I'm going to learn to row. I said, great, what's the goal? Well, learn to row. I said, that's not a goal. I could learn to row. That's not giving us a problem. You have to give yourself a problem which is going to absorb you. So what do you suggest? Well, might you win a race? How about winning Henley Royal Regatta? Oh, crikey. Marcus, you're ridiculous. And what's bigger than that? How about the Commonwealth Games? Gold medal at the Commonwealth Games. I sent her a gold pen with "Go for Gold" engraved down the side. I thought it might create an obligation vacuum. Anyway, 18 months later, Chantal, second from left, won a gold at the Commonwealths. That's a bit of a record, actually. I had a builder working in our house. He said, he saw all these pictures on the wall. He said, Marcus, you know, what do you do for a living? I told him. He said, crikey, you know, well, I've got a kid in our street who wants to be a motorcyclist. He hasn't got any money, but he's a lovely lad. I wonder if you might help him. I said, of course, bring him along next time. So Dan sits on my sofa and I said to him, this is how the brain works. We have a workshop on that. Then next time I see him, I said, what's your picture? Do think about it. He said, I still can't really get it. I said, okay, how about this? Winning the MotoGP at Silverstone, Schumacher moment, shaping a bottle of champagne. He said, well, actually, for me, it's always been the Isle of Man TT. That's a much tougher race. I thought, if it's always been there, why didn't you say? Let's make a picture of that one. There's Dan. Dan Hegarty, who did win the Isle of Man TT a couple of years later. This girl, well, her father came to a workshop that I was doing, and he said to me, my daughter's been bullied by her coach. She's been swimming for years, getting up so early in the morning. She's 16 and she's given up now. And it just seems a shame. If only she'd heard this. Would you share a day with her? So I met with Becky on a Saturday, and we talked through all this stuff, and I got her to make her a picture. And she also decided to say something to herself when she was getting abuse from her coach. Her coach would be horrible, but while that's happening, in her head she'd say, I'm a swimmer, I'm a winner, I'm Becky Cook. I'm a swimmer, I'm a winner, I'm Becky Cook. And that's a picture of her winning a gold at the Commonwealths and the Commonwealth Games after that.